So let's talk about how Tywin Lannister, my boy, let's find out how the Golden Lion ruined his whole career. And these words, they just they shouldn't apply to somebody as cunning and scheming and intelligent and merciless as Tywin Lannister. Somebody like Tywin Lannister shouldn't have ruined his whole career, but he did anyway. And let me tell you the reason why he ruined his whole career. Because unlike most of the characters in this book series that have ruined their whole career because of silly mistakes and stupid errors, these reasons do not apply to Tywin Lannister. His fall came because of hypocrisy, number one, and number two, because he continued to underestimate his son, my boy, Tyrion Lannister. Let's talk about Tyrion first. Now, in the beginning of this book series and in the show, there is a comment that Tywin makes to Tyrion that even today it doesn't make any sense to me. So they're both sitting at a table. I think this is exactly after the battle at Blackwater, after Tyrion regains consciousness. And Tywin says to Tyrion, I always thought that you were a stunted fool. Now, this is absurd. This doesn't make any sense because we all know early on that Tyrion is always reading books. We know that he is cunning. We know that he is witty. We know that he is quick on his feet. We know that he can basically talk himself out of every situation, right? We know that he can escape death with his mind and with his tongue. So this doesn't make any sense to me. Why would Tywin tell Tyrion that he had always considered him to be a stunted fool when Tyrion is next level big brained IQ? Doesn't make any sense. The only explanation is that Tywin never really cared about Tyrion because he was a dwarf and because you know, uh, because he behaved in a certain way with his whores and what have you, right? So because Tywin said this about Tyrion, it makes me believe that they never really had, a real discussion. Tywin never cared about Tyrion, what he thought, you know, what he wanted, etc. That is the only logical explanation. The dude did everything in his power to avoid Tyrion at any cost because he was a sort of insult and offense to the Lannister name because he was a dwarf, right? Secondly, the hypocrisy thing. Tywin makes it very clear that he does not accept Tyrion's behavior when it comes to drinking, and most of all, he doesn't accept Tyrion being with whores and so what have you, right? And as we find out, this strict, stoic characteristic of him being rigid and upright uh, and bluntly stating that whoring and drinking and getting drunk and behaving you know improperly is forbidden for people of their noble stature, right? That is the appearance that Tywin likes to perform in public. Because we all know when Tyrion kills Tywin, we know that he has been with Shay prior, right? And the thing with Tywin is, because of how his father, Titus, behaved with whores and everybody made fun of him, I think Tywin became this guy that said, all of these things, sleeping around, getting drunk, having fun, etc., they had to be low key, secret, hidden, in private, done in private. It shouldn't be out in the open. It shouldn't be allowed for the news to spread. He liked this reputation that he was made of stone and steel, that nothing, no pleasure could influence, his uh, adequate and proper conduct, which isn't true because, as it turns out, he was being a hypocrite and he was being, a simple mortal, just like everybody else, a simple man that uh, surrendered to his urges, just like everybody else, right? So this hypocrisy of constantly uh, criticizing Tyrion for being, loose and playful and not caring, right? This was just a show. He was pretending and performing, uh, an act, right? Because behind closed doors, Tywin was exactly like his father and just like his son Tyrion. He enjoyed women, he enjoyed sleeping around, he enjoyed drinking wine, and some um, theorists who just really analyze the text, like Order of the Green Hand and others, they speculate that Tywin has some bastards about, that he was sleeping around just like Robert Baratheon, just like his father Tytos, just like Tyrion, right? So there is evidence for that, which makes him hypocritical, right? But why is Tywin this way? Tywin is this way because he was scarred for life. He was traumatized by the way people mocked his father and laughed at him in his face, right? That is why Tywin is the way that it is, because he has been traumatized by how people laughed at his father for being a womanizer and for being weak and so have you. So he concluded that behaving this way was a sign of weakness. And in his mind, he had to keep that under lock and key and pretend and fake to be this incorruptible, unsurmountable, uh, adequate, proper, correct uh, prodigy, or a purist, a strict, rigid purist, right? This was the reputation he created, that he was incorruptible, that nothing could influence him like they influenced other people, that he couldn't be susceptible to his desires and to his urges. But of course, he was just another human being and he was being a hypocrite. Tywin Lannister is a special case. He is a unique example in this book series because basically he didn't make any real mistakes. like everybody else, right? He was 10 steps ahead. He was big brained IQ. He was scheming like a master, right? Nobody could touch him, and that is why he was probably the most powerful man in Westeros, right? He would never make the mistakes that Robert Baratheon, Joffrey, or Robb Stark made, right? He couldn't because he was just that good, right? But he still, nonetheless, ruined his whole career pretty much because he treated Tyrion like he was the scum of the earth. And because, and of course there is that one story where he traumatized Tyrion by forcing his new wife Tysha to get, well, gangbanged, and then he made Tyrion watch, and then he made Tyrion finish the job, and then he sent her away, and for his entire life, Tywin made it his mission to insult and offend and make Tyrion feel like he is unworthy, that he is a plague, that he is trash. And he also implied that he does not believe that Tyrion is his son, right? And he constantly implied that he was ashamed of Tyrion for being his son, right? And that is why we arrive at the scene. Enraged Tyrion, with the help of Jaime and Varys, escape. Jaime tells Tyrion the truth about Tysha, how they lied, that she wasn't, a whore, that she was genuine, that she loved him. And all of this was done because Tywin had to teach Tyrion a lesson. So now Tyrion, full of rage, went and he crossbowed my boy Tywin Lannister. So that is how Tywin Lannister ruined his whole career. He made no real tactical mistakes whatsoever. He was probably one of the best masterminds ever, alongside Varys and Littlefinger, right? But as always, there are always oversights. And what you do will come back to haunt you. And what haunted and what defeated Tywin Lannister in the end was his own son, Tyrion, and that crossbow. And he died on the shitter, and, he died just like everybody else. And he did not shit gold, and, you know, it's unfortunate because I liked his character. I wanted more out of him. I think the actor portrayed him, in an amazing way, and the show enhanced his character, right? The guy was as ruthless as they come. He was a splendid tactician, big-brained IQ, ruthless, merciless, But because of his trauma, because he had to maintain that reputation that wasn't real, because of his hypocrisy, and because of the hatred he had for Tyrion for no real reason, right? All of that coalesced, and he was finally defeated in a random, right? In a random way. It was pure happenstance. And even the great ones, even geniuses, right? Even people at the top are just mortals. And as we all know, in death, we are all equal. And in death, Tywin Lannister was no different than the rest of us. But I have to tell him, I have to tell you this, in the books and especially in the show, my man Tywin went out like a boss in the sense that he did not cry, he did not whimper, right? He wasn't emotional about this, right? He just took the crossbow and that was it, right? So even in death, he would not succumb to emotion. He would not succumb to fear. He would not allow himself to show a more um, fragile and vulnerable side to himself, which he probably had because he was human just like everybody else. Right? And that, I think that is the tragedy of his character, that because of the trauma that his father was mocked and belittled in public, that he had made it a mission, right? He had made it a crusade. He had made it the purpose of his life to never be regarded as weak or emotional or influenceable, and he had made it his creed to never show any weakness, any emotion, anything, right? Which is a tragedy because this man never really allowed himself to be vulnerable, to be, you know, to be anything else than this impenetrable fortress, right? Which is a shame. And that's about it. See ya.